An apprentice is often portrayed as an understudy to a more experienced, seasoned character. When referencing examples within existing popular media culture, the apprentice is at times the main hero training to overcome some form of struggle on their way to the peak part of their story arc. Other times, they are portrayed in a supporting role and, while vital to the story, sometimes forge their own path to further establish the ongoing narrative. Now, some may know, while others may be hearing this for the first time, but in the comics, G.I. Joe's all-too-popular commando ninja Snake Eyes had his own apprentice that he trained and spent time with. Such is the topic of this video, the ninja student turned anti-terrorist agent known as Kamakura. Let's begin. Kamakura's origin began in Larry Hama's original 155-issue comic book run in the 1980s, which predates his days as a ninja. He was the son of a Fred series Crimson Guard, who of course were a troop builder of sorts, but in the case of the Crimson Guards of the comics, they all looked alike. While modern fans may find this concept familiar with the use of the Star Wars clone trooper, the Crimson Guardsmen were all surgically altered to resemble one another in appearance, rather than being scientifically cloned. Due to the Crimson Guardsmen's similarity in appearance, Kamakura, whose real name is Sean Collins, actually went through more than one father, as one replaced another due to mission-related deaths within the Fred series of Guardsmen. However, it isn't until Devil's Due Publishing took over the G.I. Joe comic book rights in 2001 that Sean Collins would formally train as Snake Eyes' student, in a 4-issue miniseries appropriately titled Master and Apprentice, where he eventually took on the Kamakura name. At this point, Kamakura had joined an elite military unit outside of G.I. Joe and ends up the only survivor returning from a mission. It is at this point that Kamakura seeks out Snake Eyes, who at the time is in solitary, and officially requests to be trained to become a ninja so that he may avenge the death of his colleagues. The two had previously connected when Kamakura had written Snake Eyes a letter near the end of the original Marvel Comics run. As the G.I. Joe team is reinstated after a 7-year hiatus, Kamakura is among the new recruits, becoming an important member of the team during this 43-issue ongoing initial run that was published between 2001 and 2005. In a key issue that had me on the edge of my seat, issue number 8 had Storm Shadow infiltrate G.I. Joe's headquarters, where he set his sights on executing General Hawk to deliver a devastating blow to the newly reinstated Joe team. With Snake Eyes away from the base, Storm Shadow runs roughshod over the Joes, making a beeline through the headquarters much in the same way that Pythona did during her 1987 appearance at the Terrordrome in the G.I. Joe movie. However, Storm Shadow does not go unopposed. In fact, it is Kamakura who stands toe-to-toe with Storm Shadow, and while the veteran Arashikage ninja gets the better of Kamakura, the young green ninja is able to bravely hold off his superior for a short period, buying some time for the Joes to regroup, and ultimately, Kamakura does everything he can to keep Storm Shadow away from General Hawk. Eventually though, Snake Eyes shows up and has his one-on-one confrontation with Storm Shadow, which crosses over into issue number 9 until Storm Shadow is eventually forced to retreat. Kamakura would continue to play an important part throughout the initial 43-issue run, and when Devil's Due relaunched the G.I. Joe title with a continuation series called G.I. Joe America's Elite, Kamakura would make a return as an active reservist to a smaller, lower-budget G.I. Joe team, replacing Snake Eyes, who had apparently been killed in combat. Not that I'm saying that comic book deaths are ever a permanent thing. The 3-issue G.I. Joe Battle Files from 2002 lists Kamakura as a student who exudes the patience required to be trained under Snake Eyes. The file also lists him as being recommended to the team by Duke upon the group's reinstatement due to Kamakura's intel regarding a gathering of Dreadnought forces in Florida, which led to the knowledge of Cobra forces reuniting and thus resulting in the need for the Joe forces once again. This part of the story also plays itself out in the opening issues of the 43-issue main run. His version 1 figure file card lists him as being more personable than his master, which is consistent with what I've read in the Devil's Due comic series. And while Devil's Due wrote its last G.I. Joe issue in 2008, that closed the book on Kamakura and that particular G.I. Joe continuity for the time being. All that considered, Kamakura would then make appearances in IDW's rebooted G.I. Joe comic series, albeit mostly known under his real name of Sean Collins. Now, full disclosure, unlike the Devil's Due series, which I've read multiple times and can highly recommend, I am less familiar with his part in the IDW continuity. However, I do know Sean would take on the name of Throwdown rather than Kamakura during the first part of this run. Now, following the death, or I should say apparent death, of Snake Eyes yet again, Sean would take on the mantle of Snake Eyes himself, in a well-earned, well-deserved turn of events, something that reminds me of the original Robin, Dick Grayson, taking on the mantle of Batman in Grant Morrison's comic run. Now, if that revisitation of history was of interest to you, then you're probably like me and was wondering at the time, what figures are there of Kamakura? Well, from 2003 to 2012, Hasbro released 6 versions of him between the 3 and 3/4 as well as the 4-inch scale. Once I saw the role he played in the comics and his ties to the ARAH clan, I knew I needed to add him to my collection. This version 1 that I have here was released in 2003 and has several ninja-style weapons, as well as an Uzi-style submachine gun similar to that of his master and mentor, Snake Eyes. I'll start by saying that his dagger is actually smaller than most that came with the other O-Ring figures, so I'm a little surprised it didn't somehow get lost over the years. Not that I'm complaining. One small Easter egg here though, as Kamakura's father was a Fred series Crimson Guard like I mentioned before, it was actually my buddy named Fred from the Quebec province of Canada who sold me this figure. I found it to be a small but amicable bit of irony to the situation, almost like it was meant to happen. This figure is of the O-ring style construction to give it a feel and aesthetic that can generally fit in with your vintage 1982 to 1994 G.I. Joe collection. One criticism I do have though, other than the unnecessarily small dagger, is that it looks like it barely even has a neck, which kind of skews the bodily proportions a little bit. That said, this was the figure that I did want back in the 2000s to represent Kamakura in my collection, and was glad to finally get him in 2022. I do feel that among the releases of Kamakura by Hasbro, this one is the closest to his appearance in the Devil's Due comic run that I directly associate him with. Having said that, I did track down a version 4 release of Kamakura back around 2006, and he has been the figure representing the character in my collection for an extended period now. This version came in the Valor vs. Venom box with the Lightning motorcycle, and does a good enough job fitting the collection gap either way. Those who have seen his appearances in the Valor vs. Venom or Sigma 6 cartoons will be familiar with Kamakura outside of the comic book runs that I have been talking about for the majority of this video. Okay, so that was an overview of Kamakura's introduction as a character, his history in the comics, and a couple of figures that happen to be in my personal collection. Again, if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to this channel, hit that like button to spread this video to more viewers, and share this video with your friends. And with that, I will see you again soon with some more of my favorite toys. Take care.